I can't shake the feeling that I'm sounding really pretentious when I'm saying this, but whatever. I'm always looking for ideas to make simple Let's Plays, especially blind ones, more interesting. It doesn't really matter in what way, but most of the time that idea goes back to editing, meaning cutting out or up footage so it is more interesting to view or flows more consistently. When I thought about playing through the older Splinter Cell games as a video series, I got the idea to fully realize the OPSAT, Sam's Fisher little PDA-like device on his arm, as an always on-screen part of the video. This would, or rather should have, resulted in the video being always in real time and never stuck in the OPSAT full-screen UI outside of the game world, but still displaying the same information to the viewer. And I think I went a little bit overboard with that idea. I had played through the first chapter in about 1.5 hours and then spent around 13 hours to build up my custom OPSAT UI, but only for about half an hour of the video. So at that point I would still have to build all the elements and the movements for the rest of the video, which never happened. Not because it was hard work, which was pretty much for no one but myself, but because at the same time I found out that my whole PC system is flawed when it comes to recording, meaning I would now also have to resynchronize all of the already done recordings, so audio and video would match up. Which is just something that just takes way too much time and also doesn't really work without cuts, of which I barely had any in the recording of the first chapter. However, long story short, I didn't want to make these completely for nothing. So after around a year of them sitting on my hard drive, here are a few example shots of my custom OPSAT video UI I built for a scrapped Splinter Cell 1 playthrough. Now the first thing that took me quite a while was to actually design the UI of the screens. And the problem is that the design between the loading screen, the heads-up display and the OPSAT in the game itself are different. They use different fonts and color schemes. And I finally decided to make my OPSAT design similar to the heads-up display, since you wouldn't be seeing the other two in my videos. Having done that, I thought about how I wanted to display the information from the loading screen, since it does somewhat set up the missions and gives additional information that would otherwise be missing from a Let's Play. So I just copied the text elements one for one without the geographic map. To sort of not have just text floating on there next to the game for a while, I've added in quotation marks loading bar that fills up until the game is done giving you voiceovers. I gave it some thought and decided to go with this method, thinking that if someone was distracted by the subtitles or the voiceovers, they could easily pause the video and read the text in my OPSAT then, instead of giving it extra time before or after the first barrage of voiceovers at the start of the chapter. When the loading bar filled up, I would then switch the OPSAT elements and sort of have a booting sequence where the different UI elements pop into existence one after the other. I want to throw in that this whole OPSAT screen is of course not programmed in any way, it's just a ton of different images that I move around or switch in between depending on what screen I want to show. The OPSAT itself consists of a tab bar at the top, a content area at the center with navigation buttons at the top and bottom of it, and then another tab bar with options different from the top one. If that would actually have been a real system, you would choose an option on the bottom tab and then switch with the top bar through the sub-tabs. The bottom one has icons for the screens of the inventory, mission information to the default screen, then settings, and finally saving and loading. The top bar allows for display of goals, the default tab, notes, and data with corresponding icons of the mission information screen that is currently active, which you can see by the darker color of the bottom icon. The top ones I made myself, but the bottom ones are inspired by the icons from the game's OPSAT. Everything else, meaning color palette, fonts, and movement, is inspired by the heads-up display. A big problem was the different orientation from the game's OPSAT to mine. With the game in mind, it makes a lot more sense to have the OPSAT horizontal, as it is placed on the arm of the protagonist, but I was working with very limited horizontal space as I was trying to fill the black space around the game footage, as I played it in a 4:3 aspect ratio, since the game has a few problems with 16:9. I would show you the other screens, such as settings or the inventory, but those do not exist, as I only did the screens I currently needed at the time, and until I stopped working on this, I never interacted with those in the game. Overall, I wanted to give my OPSAT a sort of old, somewhat retro, but mostly old cell phone look, meaning a monochrome display and mostly jittery changes when it comes to different screens. As new goals would be added by the game, they would pop into existence at the top of the list and push all the others down. This is pretty annoying, since the text of a few goals are of different sizes, meaning I had to carefully place all of the goals at the right location whenever a change occurred. Finished objectives would be faded out and moved down the list, pushing other finished goals further back down. Goals that reactivate are moved as less as possible, meaning they fade in and get placed at the end of the list of active goals. At a point in the first mission you receive a note that is needed at a later point. This meant for me that I would have to switch the OPSAT screen to the notes and then display that information there and switch back to the goals after a while. To then hide me actually looking up that information during the recording, I simply cut out the time I spent in the game's OPSAT screen. Here this worked not so well, as different music was playing when I entered and got out of it. This could have been somewhat alleviated by recording this differently, but I actually came up with the idea for the OPSAT after I had already done the first whole chapters, so I had to work with what I had. And that is pretty much all I've done for this. Overall, I still really like the idea, it's just that this was really time consuming, despite being a lot of fun, and it probably would have been pretty awesome if I didn't run into the system/recording problems I still have. Otherwise it would have probably been a massive time sink, but in my opinion it's still worth it in the end. Anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this somewhat behind the scenes look into what I'm up to from time to time, even if it doesn't lead to a finished project.